I would now like to welcome our witness today, former President and Chief Executive Officer at the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation and full professor at the University of Ottawa Faculty of Law.
The company Millennium Golden Eagle that actually made the donation of $140,000, does it seem like a real company with ongoing business operations, or is there something peculiar about this business based on your observations?
Can you tell us why you stepped down as President and CEO?
Ms. Fournier, who raised their voice at you in those meetings?
You wake up.
This guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
December 7th, 2022, the committee resumed its study of foreign interference and threats to the integrity of democratic institutions, intellectual property, and the Canadian state. I would now like to welcome our witness today. As an individual, Pascal Fournier, former President and Chief Executive Officer at the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation and full professor at the University of Ottawa Faculty of Law. Ms. Fournier, the floor is yours for a 5-minute opening statement. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, I would like to start by saying that I did not ask to testify here. I received a summon, and as a lawyer, my first reaction was to ask that the House respected my confidentiality and loyalty to the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation, and if I was asked to reveal confidential information that I would have had access to, that there would be a parliamentary privilege, and that was confirmed in writing, and that is of constitutional nature. And so I will cooperate with my responses. But I did have access to a lot of confidential information, and that is normal as president. From July 2018 until April 2023. I was part of the first cohort of 2003. As a fellow, I was working on my...
Like a real...
I will be able to answer your questions. As I stated, I started on July 9th, 2018. That's important because the Chinese donation happened before the start of my mandate. So I had to manage a crisis that did not occur when I was there. And you can understand that it will be difficult to answer questions with regards to people who were there and who weren't there, and I wasn't there at the time. And so I had to examine internal documents to understand, as President and CEO, how I could shed a light on what had happened and to ensure that the board members with a financial role, well, I had the obligation to give them all the information at my disposal so that they could play their roles correctly. And in February, March, and April, it was a significant internal crisis management period, and I am now available to answer your questions. Thank you.
6-minute rounds. Mr. Barrett, please begin for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Professor, for joining us today. The company Millennium Golden Eagle that actually made the donation of $140,000, does it seem like a real company with ongoing business operations, or is there something peculiar about this business based on your observations?
So let me
let me say that in the process for me of understanding the past, again, my first reaction was to find the le reçu de charité.
The charitable receipt that had been given at that time. There were two that were signed by my predecessor, Maurice Rosenberg, and once I saw the receipts, I had a couple questions.
One mentions an address in China with the name of that company, but without the name of the two donors that were mentioned in the contract that was signed on behalf of these two donors, on behalf of the foundation, signed by Alexandre Trudeau, and on behalf of the University of Montreal. So the names of these two donors do not appear in 2016 on the receipt that was issued by the Pierre-Éliott Trudeau Foundation and signed by Maurice Rosenberg, and the address was in China. The second receipt in 2017 is different from the first one. So the name of the company is there, the address is in Quebec, and the names of the donors are there. I immediately started to ask questions about, why is it that we would have two receipts that are so different, that one seems to be international with money that seems to come from China, and another one with an address in Quebec. And I looked with the CFO, Caroline Lin, who was working with me on that file. We tried to understand what was sent to the government. Alors, je vais vous dire, il y a deux aspects.
So there are two aspects to issuing receipts. They need to be sent to the CRA. So my first reaction was to try to understand what had been sent, why the receipts were different. And secondly, we had our annual report. So for the one from 2016 and 2017, it's an obligation that we have been given by the government. Our partner is ISED. We need to make our annual report public. It needs to be shared on our website. It's sent to the government. It is approved by our board and then is sent to the government. And I tried to take the different pieces of the puzzle, and I realized that in the annual report for 2016 and 2017, both of which are public, the name of the company is not there, but the names of the donors are. So there's public information that is shared, but on the receipt, the information was different than what was posted in the annual report and what was shared to the CRA. And so I did more in-depth research at that time to understand with emails. I had access to emails that were sent before I arrived from a Chinese association that was writing to employees of the foundation, and they were asking them to mention certain information on the receipts. So the association was sending information to employees
in China and so on. Alors, j'ai pu reconstituer.
And so I was able to see what happened, but I need to specify that I wasn't there. I wasn't president at that time. I only have access to partial information.
Ask you a couple quick questions. I'm running short on time. I appreciate your precision on that issue. So you did make mention of documents. So I'm going to ask up front, ma'am, if there are documents, emails, notes, meeting minutes, receipts, or other material that are germane to our discussions today with respect to our investigation on foreign interference and the attempt of foreign influence by the organizations that you've mentioned today, any materials of that nature, would you undertake to provide those to this committee as part of your testimony today?
Écoutez, comme je l'ai mentionné au début.
As I mentioned at the beginning, I have an obligation for loyalty and confidentiality to my former employer. So I would have to say no, and it is your prerogative. If you want to have access to documents, you have the right to request that, and you have the parliamentary privilege that goes beyond professional secret, but I will cooperate with your requests. But my immediate reaction would be to not give you these documents, but if you insist, yes.
Seconds left. So you talked about how it was reported, how the donation was reported in your annual report, and how the receipts were made for Canada Revenue Agency. Is it your contention then that if the donations were not received from the individuals who were named in your filing, in the foundation's filing with CRA, that the foundation then did lie to Canadians in what was reported in their annual report?
What I can tell you is that it was my intention to ask lawyers to shed a light on this issue, and as president, I asked what I needed to do. Did I need to contact the government? And I said to say that there was inexact information in the report, and what were my obligations.
A voluntary disclosure, what do I have to say to CRA, what do I have to say to ISED? And so I seeked legal advice and guidance in order to correct the information that was sent and that was made public to Canadians. Again, remembering that this is public money, not the donations, but the foundation, right? Alors, c'était dans mon devoir.
And it was my duty to do so.
Madame.
Can you tell us why you stepped down as president and CEO? Yes, as I mentioned, we had a crisis that we had to face. There was an article published on February 28th in the Globe and Mail about interference, and that the foundation had been used for reasons other than a simple donation. At that time, I created an emergency committee to try to find a solution. Do we refund the donation? And that is, in the end, what we did. You must understand that this was before my time, so I tried to put the puzzle back together. Yes, I'm getting there. And so I wanted to refund the amount. The check was signed by 2 board members who are still members now. The check came back to us, and when it did, I did more research with my CFO, Caroline Lin, to try to understand what the issue is. There were different addresses, the receipts were different, and we wanted to understand what was going on. And with the research that I did, I realized, and I wasn't aware of that during the first 4 years of my mandate, so I realized that an association, a Chinese association, was communicating with the employees of the foundation. And not to talk about conferences on China, they were giving clear directives on what needed to appear on receipts issued by the foundation, and I found that troubling. And I also realized that there was a Chinese address, whereas in the annual report it was a Canadian address. And so there were all of these things that I wanted to shed a light on. And as president, I wanted to know what to do with the federal government, with the CRA. I needed to share that there were inaccuracies. At that time, I worked with legal specialists, and I asked them 6 questions. And I was able to work on these 6 questions to play my role as president. I was ready to stay 2 extra years. My mandate was coming to an end on July 9th. I had signed a renewal thanks to the trust of my board, so 2 extra years as president. So I was ready to stay. However, my conditions were that I needed to be able to shed a light on what happened and have confidential legal advice. I wasn't going to make all of that public, but I wanted to shed a light on all of the things that didn't match up and examine the emails sent by China. And so I wanted to go forward with this. There was some friction with the board on the mandate that was going to be given. I wanted my mandate to be very large and exhaustive, that would enable me to answer those 6 questions, but there was friction with the board and the trust was broken. 8 of us resigned on April 10th, on Easter Monday, and so trust was broken with regards to shedding a light on what had happened. And I just want to conclude by saying that when we're shedding a light on this, it's important to guarantee the independence of the investigation process. So I wanted to work with accountants and lawyers, and my CFO and I had found a lot of information, and we wanted to give that information to those experts and recuse ourselves from the process. But the people who were part of committees, we wanted them as well to recuse themselves, because if we were to stay, then it could have an impact on the process. A journalist could have said, well, it's not an independent process. And as you know, I am part of the Access to Information Act. I didn't want our processes to be attacked. They could have said you had people who were sitting on the board who were a part of the investigation, and so I wanted them to recuse themselves. I had received legal advice, and I wanted everyone to recuse themselves before the process started. And that was also what the 8 board members who resigned wanted. 1 minute. Were you intimidated during your time as president and CEO? Or did they threaten legal action against you? Nobody mentioned a legal action against me. Meetings with the board were a little rough and heated. Things were said about me that I believe were not justified, and certain board members also believe that it wasn't justified, that I was acting in bad faith in wanting to ensure that certain members recuse themselves. As a lawyer and following legal advice, my intentions were good. I wanted to protect the foundation, and as an ethics specialist, and as I mentioned this year, I created a podcast for the nomination of judges in Canada, and I worked with 2 appeal court judges from Quebec and Manitoba, and so I understand what is required. And often we want to go beyond so that nobody can attack the investigation process. That protects the process, and it would protect me as well, because all I had to do at that time with my CFO, who also stepped down the same day as I did.
And I'm going to pick up with where my friend from the block left off. You had mentioned that you had raised some concerns internally with the board, and that you wanted to flag with the federal government and the CRA as per your obligations to ISED and the CRA. Did you end up doing that? You sought legal advice, but I wasn't clear. Did you end up flagging those issues?
I actually never received the legal advice. So this is why we got to where we got. And I resigned along with 8 board members. I wanted to get the legal advice, and I had 6 questions that I needed answer. And
what were those questions?
I have the email that was sent at the time here to the executive committee. It's a privileged and confidential email that was sent with the lawyers, being in CC. I have outlined in that email the 6 questions that I was asked.
Okay, I'm gonna interject now.
Yes.
And I'm gonna demand that you submit those letters to the committee. I know that you are loyal to the board, given your confidentiality, but you do recognize the parliamentary privilege that we have, and so I will request that you submit those documents to this committee. Thank you very much. Ms. Fournier, you had mentioned you had some tension at the board. We noted that you had also mentioned that people had left subsequent to that tension. You had raised this issue. You certainly are a very learned academic expert in law and constitutional matters, in board governance, and yet there was friction with the board. Whom was the friction with?
Well, we had 14 board members for a total possible of 18 board members, but at the time 14 board members. And there's a motion that was circulated by one of the board member, Ginger Gibson.
Which board member?
Ginger Gibson, who's a former scholar as well. She had sent a motion suggesting that those who were in a conflict of interest or an apparent conflict of interest would recuse themselves. And she suggested that a committee of 3 members with one possible alternate member would deal with this matter.
I'm going to interject now. I'm going to ask, who were the members that she deemed to be in apparent conflict? If you could name them now, please.
She did not name them. What she did was the opposite, was to say, I would like to suggest a committee with members who were not there at the time, so who were appointed on the board after 2018. And that committee, and only that committee, would be responsible for overseeing the law firm and the accounting firm that had to answer these questions that I had regarding Chinese donations.
I'm going to interject again. Just so that I'm clear, was Alexander Trudeau a part of the board prior to those members joining the board? Would he have been one of the people that predated the decision for this donation?
Yes, Alexandre Trudeau currently is not on the board of directors. He's a member, but at the time he was on the board of directors and on the executive committee, which is the committee representing the board at the time of these donations.
Sure. I just noted that he had requested to attend committee in this fashion regarding this, and that's why I'm raising it. Did you at any time, as the executive member presenting to the board, did you ever receive direction from the board that you felt might have been counter to your rules and regulations or any laws that pertaining to the CRA or ISET in your reporting? Was there anything that you felt was contrary to the best interest of the organization that you perceived as direction from the board?
I will confess that I am a lawyer emeritus, avocate émérite du Barreau du Québec. I had called the Quebec Bar. The CFO had called herself l'Association des comptables agréés du Québec. We both came to the conclusion that in order to continue working for the foundation as upper management, that we had to build that process, and building that process meant that those who were there at the time would recuse themselves from any meetings regarding dealing with that Chinese donation, dealing with the law firm, dealing with the accounting, that the kind of decision-making process had to be totally independent, and they had to recuse themselves. And that is the...
And they refused, is that correct?
Excuse me?
They refused to recuse themselves?
Well, there was a motion that was circulating, and this motion, received several votes from other board members around, but they did not recuse themselves from these meetings, from the meetings that we had with the board. And they...
Who voted against?
Excuse me? I don't have access to all of my documents, I have to say, because I had to give back pretty much everything. It's very limited what I have. But several emails were sent from board members who, some of the board members who are currently on the board of director, Bruce McNiven, Peter Salas, who would send emails back to make corrections around, the mandate itself, what the mandate should be. And that was the tension at the board level, that the other board members would say, well, you have to recuse yourself. We want a committee that's totally independent. And that was at the heart of the tension.
Last question. Knowing what you know about the law and about your obligations and about the fiduciary duties that you have in board governance, is it safe to say that all of the people who resigned did so because they were quite aware of the apparent conflict of interest? They were quite aware of a donation that was not a simple donation, a very complex donation with complex implications politically, given the nature of the name of this foundation, the name of the Prime Minister, the people involved. Did you step down because you weren't comfortable with your own legal standing?
Very, very quick response.
Yes, I had to step down, and the board members, the 8 board members who stepped down with me on that day, the Monday, and it's not the entire board that resigned together. I mean, there were different resignations. There was a block of the majority of the board on Monday, April 10th, that resigned because there was a trust issue, and there was this tension regarding recusing some members who were asked to recuse themselves. Alors, c'était une rupture.
And so it was trust that was broken in order to shed a light and to protect the foundation. Thank you, Ms. Fournier. So you were made aware of the donation through the cultural organization. What is that organization and what seemed abnormal? We had a donation contract which mentioned 2 donors personally with their personal addresses in China with the University of Montreal and the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation. So on July 9th, 2018 to the end of February 2023, I believe that the contract reflected reality, that both donors had their names and their addresses, and the letters that Morris Rosenberg was sending, these letters were sent in English and translated into Mandarin. These letters were sent personally to the donors. Thank you for your donation. They were letters on behalf of the foundation that were thanking these private donors. That was my understanding. You explained that a little bit earlier. So the organization, China Cultural Industry Association, one of the donors was part of that association. That association has ties with the Chinese government. Until the end of February 2023, I didn't know, and in the emails that I had from the foundation, they weren't the donors that corresponded with the association. It was that association. And who had the authority to sign such an agreement? And who was responsible for ensuring that the names represented the donors? At the time, the foundation had a policy called Policy on the Acceptance of Gifts. And in that policy, it was for any donation of $1 million or less, it was the president that had to sign off. And for over $1 million, it needed to be the board, and they would need to adopt a resolution. And so why is it that Mr. Alexandre Trudeau's name is in the agreement? I'm not sure, and I wasn't there at the time. I don't have knowledge of that. So there would need to be some in-depth examination done. And that was one of my questions. Why was it not Morris Rosenberg's signature? And why were the receipts signed with Mr. Rosenberg's personal signature? And that's why the donation policy is supposed to create transparency. I signed contracts, and so I was also creating the receipts with my signature. If not, so you're saying that a board member like Mr. Alexandre Trudeau does not have the authority to sign on behalf of the foundation. I tried to do some research to understand that, because Carolyn Lynn and I were trying to understand what had happened in the past, and I hadn't found any resolution from the bill that allowed Mr. Trudeau to sign the contracts. I didn't see that in the minutes from the board, but I wasn't there, so I can't say. In the emails that you saw, was there any information on the Cultural Association? Did they have any photos of a Trudeau family member? I do not recall that specifically. Emails mentioned, for example, do not put the donors' names, put the name of such and such a company, and then they would send another email saying, in the end, please put this this address instead. I didn't know about these emails before the end of February 2023. And so it seemed to me that I stop doing the research and that I hire experts to shed a light on this. And have you faced any pressure from board members since stepping down, or any other members of the foundation? I am not in contact with any of the board members who are currently active members. And when I resigned, my computer, my phone, these were taken, and so I was not able to send an email to fellows or mentors to let them know that I was leaving. So I'm not in contact with current board members. At the end of our previous conversation, I asked if you were a victim of intimidation. You said that some people made statements about you. In La Presse on April 12th, a board member stated that there was intimidation and threats. Can you please describe that? I imagine they were anonymous. I can say that board meetings over the past weeks were very heated. I was accused of acting in bad faith because I wanted to shed a light on operations, and I wanted people to recuse themselves. I wasn't saying that they had done anything wrong. It was just important for me that this process be done properly. And the meetings happened in a way that I had never seen before, because all the previous meetings were respectful. We were never raising our voices. We were never attacking each other verbally. And at the end, I was being attacked by raised voices and insinuations. That was at an emergency meeting that I had asked for on March 31st. I had done this at the request of 3 members. And during that meeting, I had invited a specialized lawyer. I had invited a crisis management firm, and we talked about people that needed to recuse themselves in our mandate. Apologies, I only have 2.5 minutes, but what were the motivations of the people who were causing you problems? I'm not sure. Again, I wasn't there in 2015, 2016, 2017. I was only able to get an idea of what happened. And I wanted to just stop doing this investigation so that an outside group could do so.
Ms. Fournier, who raised their voice at you in those meetings?
Alors, écoutez, encore.
Again, I find it difficult to give names. I can't because of my obligations to my former employer.
Giving
But
names.
you can, because you're here before a parliamentary committee, and I've asked you that question. I've put that question to you. I acknowledge that you're asked that question under duress of the parliamentary committee, but that question was put to you. Who raised their voice at you at those meetings specifically?
Alors, il y avait deux
There were two individuals, Bruce McNevin, treasurer, and Peter Salas, who is a board member and president.
Published on April 12th, 2023, cites a statement provided by the foundation, says that of the $200,000 donation to the foundation, you had only received $140,000 in the form of two $70,000 payments. As the chair, as the CEO of the organization, did you provide an investigation regarding the payments falling short? What types of policies and follow-ups did you have, given the gap, the $60,000 gap between what was reported to be donated and what was received?
So the last portion of the donation was due on July 1st, 2018, and I started my mandate on July 9th. And the former CEO, Maurice Rosenberg, had not asked to receive that part of the donation. I read the contract, and I didn't have much in the file in terms of the Chinese donation file, but I read the contract and saw immediately that that money had to be spent only to, organize conferences around China, the relationship between Canada and China. And given the fact that I was adopting a new strategic plan and going on the field with different cohorts, I had no intention to organize conferences on China. And so the last portion of that donation was not asked, and this was prior to my mandate, and it had nothing to do with the new strategic plan. So I did not do anything in that regard until I received a letter from the Dean of the Faculté de Droit de l'Université de Montréal, qui était une lettre.
So a letter that was sent to Alexandre Trudeau, and that was physically sent to the foundation and then shared by email. But I was asked to send that to Alexandre Trudeau, and the Dean of the Faculty of Law of the Université de Montréal was asking that the money be returned to the Université de Montréal. Alexandre Trudeau had talks with those.
Okay, so that concludes our first hour of testimony.